assumed it was a black bear. But when I came into this clearing and I'm looking, and now I'm maybe that 50, 60 meters away from this black mass. And when I got into a clear spot, and I'm kind of low and moving slow, and I lifted my head and I look out over the top, and what it looked like to me, and almost instantly, right away, it wasn't a bear, because this thing wasn't laying on its stomach, but it was in like a tripod position. It had its left hand extended out in front of it, and the scree field is maybe like a 20 or 25 degree slope on a downward, so it's not super steep, but it's got some grade to it. And this thing's hand, and I say hand, it was a hand, like my hand, for the most part, but
it looked like somebody was bent over and had their head in the window of the deer blind, and it either heard me or smelt me, and he pulled his head out of the tent and stood straight up, and that shocked me. They don't make people that big.
The way it moved, almost as if it was gliding across the beach. I've never seen anything move like that in my life. They were screaming at each other in gibberish. It sounded like a language, and they were chuntering away back and forwards, back and forwards, back and forwards. I know what a bear looks like, and there is no way on this planet that what I saw were bears.
911, what are you reporting?
Jesus Christ, you better...
Sir?
Tia!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh.
Hey, this is Jason Small from Westville, Oklahoma, and you're listening to the best wood buggering, tree peeking podcast in the whole entire world, Sasquatch Chronicles.
Welcome to the show. My sinus infection from last week turned into bronchitis this week, and I went to the doctor and I'm on the mend. But last night I was telling the members, because of being sick most of the week, I would be replaying an episode for the public show. Most of you have not heard this encounter, and this is definitely in my top 5 favorite witnesses. John is from British Columbia. He works as a lineman. And in 2006, just before first light, John was dropped off by a helicopter on Tumbler Ridge. From the high ground, he saw what he thought was a bear, but as he watched it, he realized it was not a bear. Then he saw another one, and another one. Then what appeared to be smaller ones came out. John goes into detail about what he saw and what they were doing. After some time of observing them, the creatures started to get up and scan the ridgeline, almost like they knew they were being watched. If you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com, and if you get a chance, check out sasquatchchronicles.com. You can become a member and get additional shows. I asked John prior to this encounter, what were his thoughts on Sasquatch?
It was minimal. I grew up in southern Ontario, and being close to dense bush on a regular basis, you'd hear little things here and there, but nothing that was worth keeping in your memory. It was something that I'd always just pass by the wayside. And not that I didn't believe, but I also just never really came to the front of my mind. You were far more concerned about other things than you were some sort of mystery creature that you had heard of, in a few conversations throughout your life. But beyond that, I really had my eyes opened years later, that's for sure.
Yeah, I could understand where you're coming from, John. And if you would kind of take me to this 2006 incident, what were you doing and walk me into what happened?
It was a regular morning. I was working seismic in kind of mid to northern BC in a town called Tumbler Ridge. It was a full heli in, heli out job. It was normal every day. Get on a helicopter, go do your job, come home, sleep in a motel. It was all provided by the company, but this was just an everyday morning, late August, a little bit chilly. We go to the safety meeting first thing. Everybody discusses their tasks for the day. I get in the truck with a bunch of other guys, many trucks, but we get in the trucks. We head to the staging area where they keep the equipment and they keep the helicopters and a lot of other stuff. But we get out there, wait till first light, helicopters fire up, everybody starts going about their way, and we're radioed up, and I've got my backpack and a bit of food and a bit of equipment. But I was what was called a troubleshooter. So that day, I was tasked with troubleshooting a line break in an area. I don't remember the line that it was on, but I was given this task, and it was just routine. I talked to the pilot, kind of showed him my paperwork. He discussed it. We flew from staging out into the field, over the lines. It was a big 3D job by seismic terms, but we went over the line, and prior to us going out and laying out these lines, there's another company or crew that goes in. They're called slashers. They clear the lines. They make the helipads. They make the area accessible to us when we're ready to go in. And so you can see they look almost like scars on the mountain, but just thin cut lines. Everyone's flagged orange or yellow tape, depending on the area, and dangerous areas have different colored tape. But long story short, we fly over the line. I talk to the pilot. He talks about the general area that the problem's in. I, talk to him about the easiest access. He shows me a helipad closest to the area that I'm going to fix this line break. And there was a large scree field, just fallen rocks, a big ledge. It was huge, maybe half a mile long along the side of the mountain, and maybe a couple 100 meters wide. And he drops me off at the helipad. I've got everything that I need. This isn't an uncommon occurrence. It's pretty normal at this time in my life. I've been doing it for some time. And he drops me off. I kind of see the path that the slashers had cut from the helipad down to line. And it was quite a trek. It wasn't too crazy. Drops me off on top of more of a rolling mountain, big crest. And I walk down this slash, and I'm following the flags. And it's clearly been cut quite a while before we were there, because there was a lot of overgrowth and a lot of brush on either side. And I just remember thinking the whole time, like, you would see deer tracks every once in a while, or you'd see moose tracks every once in a while, but that's normal when you're in these areas. And so it's just for me, it's kind of head down, get to the location, fix the problem, back to the helipad, call it a day for that part of the job anyways. But that day, I hadn't been to that helipad yet. I'd done a few on like that job in other areas, but I get dropped off. I walk down, it comes out, and this slash, or this cut that I'm walking on, it starts to parallel the scree field. I can see the bright daylight through the trees, but there's still maybe 8 or 10 meters of bush between me and the edge of this small drop off where the scree fields start. And the path it starts to parallel along the side of the scree field. And I had seen it from the helicopter, so I could tell that I had to kind of traverse around the scree field and then drop down near the bottom corner of it and head towards line. And I knew that line was only a couple 100 meters on the other side of the scree field. So as I'm walking, it's just a normal day. I did the same thing the day before in another area. I did the same thing the day before that. For the 15 days prior to that, I had done the exact same thing or something similar to it. So I wasn't really thinking much. I just paying attention to my surroundings. I had my radio turned right down, like I could hear it, but just barely. And they're strapped to your chest. You're wearing a safety vest, and on the safety vest is a spot for your radio that's right close to your jawline, like it's very much on your shoulder. And so I'm just listening, but it's still the morning, and so I'm listening to different crews flying out, and I'm listening to just the normal morning routine for everybody to get to work. And this was supposed to be an in and out. It would take, we were guessing, between an hour and a half and 2 hours to get down there, radio in, find the line break, test the line with the observers, and then head back to the helipad. So protocol always states, you if you see a bear, there's protocol to follow. If you see any kind of potentially dangerous wildlife, there's protocols to follow. There's things that you have to do or are trained to do anyways, but it's very rare. I mean, I'd seen black bear over the summer, but you usually only ever see the rear end of them running away from, they hear you before you see them, and you'd hear the crashing in the woods and you'd see the ass of a bear running away from you in the other direction. But it was quite rare. And you'd hear stories over dinner and stuff, but nothing too crazy. And so I didn't really think much of it. It wasn't something that, was on my mind. I was just doing my job. And I'm paralleling the top of this scree field or boulder pile. It's absolutely massive. And the boulders were anywhere from the size of a van down to basketball size. And I'm paralleling the top ledge, and with almost like, it was almost clear as day. You could hear falling rocks, and it was a few of them, just rocks clacking together, not super loud, not super quiet, just in the distance. I could hear rocks clacking together, and reminded me of stories that I had heard of other workers down by the river, usually, but there's been stories of grizzly bear rolling rocks down by the river, eating bugs and doing things like that. But it put me on a bit of a high alert, and I'm listening, and I heard it, and 10, 12 seconds goes by, and I heard it again, and then 5 seconds goes by, and I heard it again, and I'm stopped. I've stopped walking to this point, and I'm just listening, and I can't see anything. I can see into the scree field, but not very well. And I'm just listening, and I hear it, and I hear it, and I of course, I'm 20 or 21 at the time, and I'm kind of intrigued, and I want to, get a better view, and I want to be quiet. I don't want to cause a commotion more than anything. I just want to see what's making the noise. And for a minute, I thought maybe it quite literally just falling rocks in the scree field. That's the reason it's there. It's just falling rocks. And so I'm trying to source out what it is, and I can't quite figure out what's going on, but I'm definitely hearing something, and it's consistent. You'd hear it, and then there'd be a small gap, and then you'd hear it, and there'd be a small gap, and that consistently kept happening. So I'm kind of wandering forward. I'm looking as best I can through this trees. Like I said, there was quite a bit of trees between me and the edge of the scree field, at the top of the scree field. And I not found an area, but I walked up on an area where the trail had a small bend in it, and there was an area where I could almost see clearly between some trees down into this scree field. And I couldn't really see anything at that point, but I could tell just at this point, like I'd only walked for maybe 35 or 40 minutes from the helipad down to this area. But then over the next 20 minutes, like I was only covering 5 or 6 meters, a minute. Like I wasn't moving very fast. I was constantly trying to see and be quiet. And I had, I didn't want to disturb anything, but I also wanted to see what I was dealing with. And as I came up to this small bend in this slash or this cut path, I can see a little bit clearer. And not to say like I could see something, but I couldn't see what it was. And I was still about a football field away, 100 yards ish. And so I start following the path a little bit further, and similar thing happens. There's a small bend in the trail, and then I can see ahead of me, there's a spot, and I can see the sun shining through the trees very clearly, quite lit up in this one area. And so I very slowly and very cautiously walk up, and I start edging myself out of the cut line and into the trees a little bit, and trying to look out over the edge. And there was just almost like a perfect opening, like fully mature trees, and they came to a dead stop, and the edge of the scree field just started. It wasn't gentle at all. It was definitely just a straight drop. The drop wasn't very high, but maybe 10 feet. But there was like a perfect area in some large trees, and I was able to position myself where I could see now what I had glanced at previous. And at first, of course, like every story is, I assumed it was a black bear. But when I came into this clearing and I'm looking, and now I'm maybe that 50, 60 meters away from this black mass. And when I got into a clear spot, and I'm kind of low and moving slow, and I lifted my head and I look out over the top, and what it looked like to me, and almost instantly, right away, it wasn't a bear, because this thing wasn't laying on its stomach, but it was in like a tripod position. It had its left hand extended out in front of it. And the scree field is maybe like a 20 or 25 degree slope on a downward. So it's not super steep, but it's got some grade to it. And this thing's hand, and I say hand, it was a hand, like my hand, for the most part, but this hand is on this boulder, and its left leg and its right leg are splayed out behind it. And so it's in like a tripod position. And with its right hand, it was moving rocks, nothing too huge, basketball size, maybe a little bigger. And it's moving them out of the way. And I'm watching this thing stick its hand down. It would move some rocks and stick its hand down, and then it would move some rocks and it would stick its hand down. And then I watched it with the hand that was free and moving rocks. I watched this thing literally grab something. It's too small for me to see, but it quickly moved its hand. It grabbed something and it put it to its face. And when it put it to its face, I watched like I don't know how to reference it, almost like somebody flicking a popsicle sticker, like these huge lips like came out to an index and a thumb, like there was something in its index and its thumb. And I watched these huge lips like go over its fingers, and then let go of whatever was in its fingers and go back to doing what it was doing. And so this now is in the first 15 seconds, and I'm staring at this thing, and right away my brain, it knows what I'm looking at. I've heard the stories. I've seen some movies, and I'm thinking right away, like, this is not happening right now. I'm staring at this thing, and it's close enough, and its head, like it's looking down at the ground, and it's in this tripod position. So I see the top of the head, I see shoulders, and it moved a small amount. And when it moved, I could absolutely see breasts, like the tops of breasts, because I'm looking down the hill at this thing. And so there's this very large, hairy head, and black skin, black hair, not fur. This is hair. I noticed what caught my eye mostly was what was coming off of the forearm. It looked like a hair on a human's head, draping off of the forearm, and this thing was moving its hand in and out of the rocks and moving rocks. And I'm watching this thing. Without a doubt, I know what I'm looking at this point, and I'm still trying to gather my thoughts. My heart's racing. I'm having a hard time trying to accept that absolutely what I'm looking at, that's, like I said, 50, 60 yards away. It's close enough that I could see its, and like when it would put things in its mouth, I could see its lips moving, no teeth, but these over exaggerated lips that it almost like it could stick its lips 2.5 or 3 inches off of its face, and it would kind of suck off of its fingers whatever it was grabbing. And I'm staring at this thing, and I can't look away, and it's just going about its business, and it's quite literally in that same position. And the way that it moved, like, I don't want to say a spider, but it was very wide and splayed out, and it would shift to the right. It would move some rocks. It would do this. And this is all happening inside of 120 seconds, like 2 minutes. And while I'm watching it, I'm staring right at it, and I hear more rocks move. And I'm looking at the thing that was moving the rocks. And so I kind of pan out a little, and I'm looking out over the scree field, and just down behind it by maybe, I don't know, 10 yards or 15 yards, I can see a small tuft of the same hair, but I can't see the whole thing. And it's tiny, like a 12-year-old. I don't know, like as far as how tall it was, but it looked to be maybe like a 60-pound person as far as size goes. Anyways, yeah, like a 12 or 13-year-old kind of size. But I can't see it very clearly. Only really if it was moving from one spot to the next, I'd see its back and its head and its shoulders kind of come up a little bit, and then it would go down again. And then right beside it, not 3 seconds later, there was another black mass that was just as tiny. And they're a little further away, but I'm staring right at them. And I'm thinking in my head, like in this moment, now I'm looking and there's clearly three of them. There's a large one. And it really wasn't that large. I'd imagine it was tall, but very slender. Everything was like, I don't want to say skinny, but not built by no means. Like the arms, other than them being excessively long, were proportionate to this thing's, its rib cage and its torso, and it like everything just seemed very like slender and fit. And it looked healthy. It didn't look sick. I'm looking right at it. This is first light. Like this thing is in broad daylight. There's no shadows. There's no nothing. This is a black mass that I'm watching close enough with my 20-year-old eyes. Like this thing is, I can see it as clear as day. And it's hard to explain. Like just the position that it was in, I could do it, but not for it was so long and so splayed out in a tripod position that I couldn't believe it. And I kept looking at its head. And every time it would put its hand to its mouth, I couldn't believe how big the mouth was and how much it could protrude its lips. The lips would come out so far from what I could see. And I'm staring at this thing, and just like the way that it moved and the way it was just effortlessly in this position, like a one-handed push-up, but splayed way out. And it was just comfortable in that position. And it would just roll some rocks and it would dig around, or roll some rocks and it would dig around. And I watched it, and when it would grab something, it would almost not look up in my direction, but look up in my general area, not looking at anything, but to lift its head to put something in its mouth. And then it would go back to digging in the ground, and then it would lift its head and put something in its mouth. And I'm watching this happen. And these two small ones, I can see them like they're right there, but there's not they're in the scree field. So all I'm seeing is like a black mass, and it's tiny, and another black mass, and it's tiny. And I can't really see them that well, but they're absolutely there. I'm looking right at them, and they're moving in a similar fashion, but I don't see arms. I don't see legs. I more see the crest of a head, and I see like an arching back, because they're further down the hill. And I'm staring at this thing for, at this point, what seems like a good enough time that I'm getting my wits about me. I've calmed down enough that I'm starting to think, and I'm starting to process what's going on in front of me, and I'm really taking it in. And I know that I have my LG chocolate phone in my backpack. I know that it's there, and obviously there's no service out here, but I've got my phone. It's in my backpack, and I thought, I got to get a picture of this. And then my brain like reels it in a little bit, and like all I'm going to take a picture of is a black blob with these shitty cameras from, the early 2000s on the back of cell phones. It was newer technology at the time. And I thought, I'm going to risk trying to get this backpack off my back and unzip the top and dig through and find the phone. I knew where it was in the bag, but I just realized it wasn't worth the squeeze. The juice wasn't there. I had to just take it in with my eyeballs. And at this point, I'm holding the radio in my hand. I've got the volume knob at 0, not off, though the radio is on, but I've got the volume knob on 0. And I'm staring at this creature, and a minute goes by and nothing has changed. It's the same action. This thing had to roll a few rocks, grab some things, put it in its mouth, roll a few rocks. And as I'm watching this, more movement to my right, and it was not a lot, maybe 100 yards away, where the scree field is starting to come to an end and narrow off near the slash line that I'm supposed to be walking on to get around this field. I see on the tree line another black mass, but this thing is 2.5 times thicker, easily 2.5, 3 feet taller or longer than the one that I'm staring at. And it's massive. And you could see like it was barrel shaped. The chest and the hips were the same dimensions from top to bottom. Yes, the shoulders stuck out quite a bit. The head was very much, there was no definition between the top of the shoulder, or no cut line, like no straight up over the head kind of. Like a human, we have a neck between our shoulder and our head. There's a space between our ear and our shoulder, where this thing, it was looking at it, it was a mass. I'm looking at a mass, but it's close enough and it's forward facing, and it was the same color, but older and more worn. So I could see a bit of belly. The one that was in front of me, I never did see its belly at this point because it's laying on its belly, digging in the rocks. But the one that's standing in the edge of the tree line, I could see wear marks on the body where there was exposed skin near the belly. It was exposed skin around the knees, and it was really like worn, like ashy color knees, and the feet. I wasn't really looking at any feet or nothing. And the hands and the size of the arms, it just created a big mass in this sunlit edge of the scree field with bright green trees behind it. I'm looking at a black mass, and I haven't moved. I'm in the exact same spot. I can see this thing come out, and it takes only maybe 2 or 3 steps out, and it gets into a similar position. It was more of a crouched position, though. It bent at the knees, and it put its left hand down on some rocks a little bit up the hill from where it was crouched, and it started rolling rocks. And I'm watching this thing now, and I'm looking back and forth. The small ones at this point, they're by the wayside in my mind, because there's a very clear one right in front of me, continuing the same action over and over and over again. And now there's this, it was easily twice as heavy. It had to have been like 600 pounds. And I only know that in reference to, like, it would have been the biggest bear you've ever seen, but it wasn't a bear standing on 2 legs. But it was massive. It had to have been that heavy, without a doubt. That's probably even being generous, like on the low end. But this creature crouches down, puts a hand down, starts rolling rocks, and now I'm watching, and it moved very quickly out of nowhere. All of a sudden, like, I'm watching it, and you could see it fixate on something, and it starts flipping rocks like super quick in this one area. And this slender one that's in front of me, it raises its head and looks over at this larger one. And the 2 little ones, I can see them because they've stopped what they were doing, but it's not like clear, like a face, and all I can see is a hairy mass with a lump on top of it, looking in the direction of the large one. And it's moving rocks quick, and grabbing down inside of this area that I can't see what it's grabbing at, but it grabbed a hold of something, and I'm not going to even guess what it was, but it was a rodent. Like, it was definitely a rodent, because I could see like a flash of tan sticking out of the bottom of this thing's hand. But this thing got a hold of it, and I heard it, like this rodent, it squealed like it's being squished. It was absolutely like if you stepped on a cat, or it was not a friendly sound. And again, it's fairly far away, but I can hear this without a doubt. It's not loud and clear, but I can hear it. I'm sitting there in absolute silence watching this happen. And it grabbed it. And just as fast as it grabbed it, there was a sound coming out of the trees like I've never heard in my life. And well, I guess maybe I've heard stuff like it, but it literally sounded like a bulldozer was going to pull out into the field. And the biggest thing I've ever seen personally in my life, short of an elephant, came out of the woods, and same thing. It was majority black, but it had to have been 900 pounds, had to have been up there, because this thing, like, I couldn't believe it. So I'm still trying to I'm still trying to put together this large. It was a female as well, but this one that stepped out of the tree line just minutes before, it was clearly a female, but far older, far thicker, unbelievable, undescribable almost. It's hard to describe what I'm looking at because it was quite literally a black mass, and watching it bend at the knees and watching it put a hand down and watching these things happen. I'm just absolutely blown away at this point. And when it grabbed whatever it grabbed and that sound came out of the thing, just screeching away, just as fast as it started, probably screech for 3 or 4 seconds. The sound coming out of the woods was undescribable. The only reference I would have is like a bulldozer in the woods, or something absolutely massive. Just the amount of crashing was an instant too. It was so aggressive and so loud, and this thing came out of the woods, and it overshadowed this large female that I'm looking at with this thing in its hand. And when it came out, this female is still crouched to the ground, and he's barreling towards it, and he's running on a side hill of scree. So his left hand, he had put it down a couple times. Same thing. Like I'm looking at a hand. Yes, there's a considerable amount of hair on it, but it was still, I'm looking at fingers. I'm looking at a thumb, and this thing moved out so fast to the female and got over top of it, and in an aggressive way. Like it was definitely it was a threatening gesture. There was no sound that I heard. There was no grunting or any noises that this thing made, but it absolutely stood over top of this large female with an aggressive stance, an aggressive stature. And it stands up, and it's got its head low, and it's not looking up, and this thing is right over top of it. And as it's standing up, this large male, and I know it was a male. I didn't actually see what was going on down there, but you could see when he was darting out of the woods that there was definitely something inside of all that hair swinging around in there, if you know what I'm saying. And the shoulders had to have been a foot wider than this large female, and he tapered down. He had more of like a V shape to him, and it wasn't super athletic, but it absolutely was far more athletic than this large female that I've been looking at. And he's standing over top of her, and she stands up. She's got her head down low, and he grabs her arm and forcefully, aggressively, like rips whatever it is out of her hand and stuffs it in his mouth. It's so fast. And I'm staring at this while this is happening, and nothing is short of what's going on in front of me. Around me, it's still dead quiet. Like, yes, I'm hearing rolling rocks. That's the main sound that I'm hearing at this point. And just as fast as that happened, he starts to step off and back into the tree line. And she's turned and she's going down the scree field, this large female. And at this point, the skinny one that's kind of the closest one to me is looking at the other two. And without a doubt, like it was like a light switched. It was, all of them stopped. All of them stood up, short of the 2 small balls of fur that were further down the hill. The 3 of them stood up, and they started scanning, and they weren't scanning necessarily directly in my direction, but they absolutely were scanning the edges of the tree lines. I mean, from one end to the other, and I could hear the one that was closest to me, the skinny one, I could hear it sniffing, but it wasn't sniffing like a dog. It was sniffing the amount of inhale. It was unbelievable. Like the sound, just and it went on and on and on and on, and then it would open its mouth and go like, and it did it again, and then it did it again, and my heart rate starts rising, and I was thinking like, nothing's looked at me at this point. But they're scanning the tree lines, not just in my direction, but in all directions. And I can clearly hear this thing in front of me making this long, it had to have been like 5-second plus inhales, very deep inhales. And at this point, it stood up. So now I'm looking at the full frontal of this hairy, slender creature, clearly female. But it was, I want to say, like feminine. It had feminine qualities. It didn't, like, everything about it was slender and long, and the way that it stood, everything about what I was looking at was like we've all seen a coyote with mange, and we've all seen a beautiful coyote running across the prairies. Like, this was a healthy animal that I'm looking at. It was, the hair didn't seem to be like tangled and knotted and in a mess or dirty. This was like a well-kept, well-fed being, and I'm staring at it, but this thing, it's breathing, and I'm thinking, I don't know exactly what it's doing in this moment, but they're absolutely scanning the tree line. So I've gotten as low as I possibly can, and I'm looking through now, like the shrubbery that I've been looking over the entire time, and I can still see this thing, and they're scanning, and the big one now has gone to the edge of the tree line, and the larger female, she had headed down this scree field in this little narrow edge where I'm seeing all this happen. And so she's taken a few steps down. I can still see her, but this tall, slender one has now taken my main focus, and it's just these huge, deep breaths. I couldn't believe it. Almost unbelievable, the amount of air that this thing could take in. And I'm staring, and I'm thinking, like, this is it. Like, this is, when I lock eyes with something. And I had, like I said, I had my radio on, and I had the volume right down, and I just barely cracked the volume so that I could hear if I was going to talk over anyone or if anyone was talking in that moment, and it was radio silent. So I just brought this radio like right up to my mouth. It must have been the most muffled sound ever. And I said my name, where I was, because obviously it's all recorded. But they know that I'm in the area and I'm the one with the problem. And I said my name. I said the line that I was closest to. And I just said what everybody says when they panic. I said, bear, bear, bear. And almost right away, now I'm turning my volume right down as low as I can at this point, because I'm going to get a response right away. That's a very serious thing in this line of work. And almost right away, I hear this French accent pilot come on right away. He responds on my way, and I stayed in that exact spot, and I never moved, and I'm staring. And what felt like probably 5 or 6 minutes, it was maybe only a minute and a half or 2 minutes. I could hear the helicopter in the distance, and I could hear it coming. And at the time, I'm not sure exactly what he was doing, but he dropped whatever it was he was doing, and he was over my area, and he knew where I was, and he knew the direction to come in from, and he came across the scree field from left to right, where I'm at the top and these things are in the middle. And when he came across, he was barely over top of the trees, and he had that thing wound right out, and he was just making a pile of noise. But these things, like, as the noise is getting closer, I'm watching them all start to head to where this large male had walked into the woods. And that was that. This helicopter came careening up over the hill and into the scree field, and he's revving his engine. And I watched, for the most part, I'm laying down at this point looking through this shrub, and I watched them all move to the side and go into the bush. And I watched this helicopter pilot. They were in the bush as he's coming over and into the scree field. And I just thought, like, this is my moment. It's loud as hell. There's a helicopter pretty much right in front of me. I can barely hear. And I just thought, like, I got to move. And so I stayed low, and I started heading back to the helipad, and I turned up my radio at this point, because now there's a helicopter within 100 meters of me. I had to turn it up, and I'm busting ass back to this helipad, and I made it back a lot faster than I made it down. I tell you, anybody who's been in the mountains, it's a lot easier to go uphill on the body than it is downhill. Downhill's hard on you. You got to go slow, and you got to be careful, but uphill, you just muscle it out. And I put my head down, and I'm headed up, and I started to calm down maybe over halfway, because he's still in the area. I can hear him back there in the scree field, and I'm working my way back to the helipad, and I knew where I was. I knew that I only had, maybe another 10, 15 to get up to the helipad. I radioed the pilot, and I said, look, I'll be there in 10 to 15. He goes, okay, I'll meet you there. I get up to the helipad just after he lands. So I hear him come over me, and he lands on the helipad, leaves the chopper running. I come up, They give you the signal, you approach, I get in, and it's just him. There's no one else in the helicopter, just like when he dropped me off. And I sat down beside him, and he looks over at me and he goes, "This is pretty scary stuff when you're out here, eh?" And I said, "My man, that wasn't a bear." And I watched his eyes just go the widest I'd ever seen. This cool and calm and collected helicopter pilot. I'd never seen eyes so wide. And he said to me, he goes, "We shouldn't be in this area." He goes, "You're not crazy." He goes, "You're not the first person to say something about this." And he's like, "And they won't bring it up in the safety meetings. They always use the term bear. They always use the term, danger, or they use a cougar, or they never have brought it up." But he said, "You're not the first person to tell me something like this." And I guess like as we were flying back, he told me that some girls had been followed out of the woods, not in that exact area, but on the same job. So within, maybe 10 kilometers or 15 kilometers of where something had happened to me, he said some girls got followed out of the woods and they were calling in bear, bear, bear. And they said it wasn't a bear. It was tracking them and paralleling them. And I knew the girl, her name was Wendy. And I kind of said something to her like a few days later when I had an opportunity to talk to her. We were from two different, she did something else than me, but I kind of said like, "Hey, I saw some pretty wild stuff up there in that area." And she kind of said, "I saw some pretty wild stuff in that area too, And she kind of said, we were paced out of the woods, and she goes like, we were really scared. And when we'd stop, it would stop, and then we'd go and we'd hear it. And she goes, couldn't see nothing, but she said she thought that there was people in the woods with them, and it was kind of a common ground. But other than that, I only brought it up to a few other people, and after that, it wasn't a good thing to bring up. I noticed most people weren't responsive. It was mostly a joke at that point. "Oh, you're the guy that, says he saw this or says he, experienced that." And, I'd get scoffs and I'd get kind of turned away at. And I do feel like it was quite a hit on the morale. Here I am. I just had an experience that never in a million years I thought I would have. And when I tried to tell people that I thought I could talk to about anything or confide in, and they're looking at me like I'm a nutcase. And I'm thinking like, this wasn't a blob in the woods. Like I sat there it had to have been 6 or 7 minutes. Like I stared at it in broad daylight in the middle of the sun. Like there was no obstructions. There was I was staring at this whole event go down. And after that, like, I actually I buried it. I never thought. The next day I went to work like a normal day. Like it was the same idea. The only difference is after that day in the safety meetings, they started sending us out in pairs. And a lot of the time they do send you out in pairs to do troubleshooting, but there were certain scenarios where you just go and get something done real quick and wrap it up and get back to the helicopter. But after that, there was almost nobody went out alone that I can recall on that job anyways. And yeah, the stories that came out of there were, I guess I wasn't alone. That helicopter pilot, I mean, just the look on his face alone, it told me like he knew something, and it was the same scenario for him. He didn't want to bring it up, but he was like, "You're not crazy, man." He's like, "Well, I don't think we should be out here." He's like, "You're not the only one that's had these experiences." So it was definitely something that I don't know. I put it on the wayside and I just went back to work. I finished the season. We worked, until the snow was too deep to do anything else. And we headed into the prairies and started another job. So it was, I don't know, after that, like my interest was piqued after that. So I had been and have been listening to your show now for some time because, I can relate. And then I've also, I'm a little more like my local ski hill where I'm at. There's some old newspaper clippings from the early 80s talking about Sasquatch and Bigfoot. And I kind of asked a few of the older lifties and older operators there. I said, "Hey, like, what are those news clippings?" And they told me some stories. This is it. I live in the prairies now. And these guys said, like, we see them every spring and every fall. In the spring, we see them heading west. And in the fall, we see them heading east. And I guess they traverse all across the escarpment that the ski hill's on. And God knows where they're going. But I mean, the mountains are only a few hours away from me. And I mean, I don't know if these things migrate or not, but I've heard from more than one person in this specific ski hill area that said, yeah, in the spring, we'll see them heading west. And in the fall, we see them heading east. And it's just not a common occurrence, but it's definitely something that's happened more than once.
You know, that's a scary account. You're dropped off in the middle of nowhere, British Columbia, by helicopter. And not only do you see one, but it sounds like you saw a family group of them. And it's terrifying just to see one. You know, I always say if you see one, there's probably more nearby. And you kind of have the advantage of being up on this ridge. The creature that was putting stuff in its mouth, or maybe another one you got a better look at, how far away from you are these creatures? And if you would you describe them? I mean, what surprised you the most looking at the face? Did it remind you more of a man? Did it remind you more of an animal?
No, it definitely it had human characteristics. You could see that its movements were intentional. This wasn't bumbling at all. The things that caught me off guard the most, this slender female was the closest one to where I was sitting, and the movements you could see were calculated, and they were like very. This thing was thinking. Like, you could clearly see that it wasn't just bumbling around in the rocks hoping to get lucky and find something. You could see that it was thinking, and it was moving purposefully. And the way that it would put its hand to mouth, it would be the same way that you or I would eat a strawberry, or short of these huge protruding lips that would come out and almost suck off of its fingers. But it absolutely, the things that really threw me off was the above the eyes, like the eyebrow, or I don't know where the eyebrow, your bones are attached to it, your skull there. It was considerably further out. So this forehead, or top of the skull in the front of the face, was considerably further out than yours or mine, or any human for that matter. But other than that, like, looking at it, the proportions were really far off, and the eyes, you couldn't see, like, I'm looking at this thing, and when I did see its face and see its eyes, you couldn't see a pupil inside of a white eyeball. What I was looking at was a black, I could see like the glint of reflection. That's all I could see. So I knew there was eye sockets there, and I could see movement of the skin on the face, and its lips and its nose. It would crinkle its nose and stick its lips out really far and suck on its fingers. But the eyeballs were just as black as the creature, but you could only tell from the shine, because the eyeball's a little bit wet or reflective. Like, you could see just a little bit of glint of light off of the eyeball itself. But outside of that, like, it had a nose. It was considerably wider than ours, and the bridge of the nose, the long part, it was long, like really long, but it was a lot closer to the face, where my nose, or it's kind of sticks off of my face a fair amount. It was quite close to the face, and the nostrils, I could see them from the angle, because I'm kind of looking at a downhill, and it would look up, like not at me, but in my direction to suck on its fingers. But you could see that the nostrils were twice, if not three times as large as a normal man's nostrils. Like, they were definitely exaggerated. And then the width of the mouth was unbelievable. Like, I couldn't believe it. I'm thinking, like, it was proportionate to the skull, this thing's mouth. It seemed like it almost would go ear to ear almost. It was definitely not a little bird mouth. It was very wide and very controlled. The lips it was able to, like I said, it was unbelievable watching how far the lips came off of the face. The only thing I can think of is maybe like an orangutan or something. Just the way that it would almost like make a kissing face, and the lips were inches off of its face, and then would suck its fingers and then go back to doing what it was doing. It was pretty wild, but at the same, it definitely, looking at it in proportions and the way that it was moving, it was not an animal, but it clearly wasn't a human either. It was definitely more human than animal, though.
And prior to actually seeing these things, you didn't really buy into it. As far as Bigfoot being real, let me ask you your opinion, kind of your impression. What do you think would have happened if that group would have ran into you?
No, like the likelihood of that happening, in my opinion, was so low. It didn't, nothing about the scenario that I was in felt threatening or dangerous. If anything, my gut instinct was, if I was, say, spotted or, my position was given up, whatever you want to call it, I kind of feel like they would have walked away or ran away or it just got away from that scenario because, like I said, it didn't feel, even when this big male was standing over top of the female in a very like aggressive, but not aggressive in a violent way. It was just asserting its dominance. It was standing over this female and you could clearly see that it wanted whatever was in its hand. And when it grabbed her arm and peeled it out of her hand, there was some aggression there, but I didn't feel like these things were violent or, that's just how it felt in that specific scenario. What I was watching was what it felt like. We could go back to the animal thing. It felt like I had snuck up on a herd of elk and was watching them eat grass. They were just animals, like just eating and doing whatever it is they do. I didn't feel threatened. My feelings at that time were, I can't believe what I'm staring at. That was the feeling that I felt.
The creatures just stop what they're doing. They get up like they're on alert and they start looking around. What do you think tipped them off? Do you think that they were looking for you?
I have no idea what tipped them off. I thought to myself in that moment, again, I'm not like an avid hunter, but I have hunted and spent some time in the woods, a fair amount of time growing up and through the years. But it was a calm day. There was a slight breeze. I was uphill from them. I don't know if I was upwind or downwind or sidewind from these things, but something. And in the moment, because nothing looked at me, but they were scanning the tree line, but they weren't just scanning in my area. They were scanning, and I mean the entire scree field, the looking down at the bottom along the tree line. They were looking along the top. And maybe it's a scent thing. Like I thought maybe because of the way that this slender female was breathing, these long, deep inhales, it felt as if like they were trying to catch a scent. That's how I perceived it as. But that's not how it started. The way that it started, like it was the big male, the way that it stiffened up, like I watched it and so like nothing could harm this thing. Like the way that it ate, it was like nobody was watching. It was just doing its thing. And then it is just as fast as it was in this like position of like no one was watching it. It just stopped and started scanning. And then, like I'd said, that female, the large female that started walking down kind of away from me, it stopped and started scanning. And then the slender one stood up and started scanning and then taking those big, deep inhales. So I don't, like, it could have been scent. I don't really know, but it could have been a lot of things because I mean, in that moment, like I absolutely was pouring sweat, man. Like I wasn't sweating from coming down the hill. It was actually a cold late August morning. It was chilly. I had a hoodie on but in that moment, my elevated heart rate and my, it was like, I absolutely, even just talking about it right now, I'm overheating it. So like, it was definitely a moment when I'm reliving it. It's like, I know what I was feeling and very well, it could have been scent, but there could have been more to it. I don't really know. I hadn't moved a muscle. I hadn't made a noise. I was still in that same position. And that was the worst part because now these things started scanning and I'm kind of in a bit of a, like, I want to say prone, like I'm standing, but I'm kind of crouched down. So just my eyes are coming over top of these shrubs that are right in front of me, just enough so I can see the one that's closest to me. And then the other ones were further back so I could see them a little bit clearer. But as soon as they started scanning, now I had to move because I felt vulnerable. I was exposed. And so I had to lower myself to the ground. And that was the worst experience of my life because here I am trying to, like a ninja in the night, I'm trying to like lower myself down while these things are scanning the woods. that was probably one of the most hair-raising moments, and that's why I grabbed the radio so quick. That was it for me. I'd had enough. I was thinking like, okay, my cover's not blown, but these things either there's another animal in the area, something tipped them off, something happened, and these things aren't happy with me at this moment or with whatever's going on around them. And they are scanning the area quite heavily. And that was when I got on the radio.
You know, I've talked to many helicopter pilots over the years, whether they were doing line work, kind of what you're doing, or firefighters going into a certain area and helicopters dropping them off. A lot of these helicopter pilots have seen these creatures, and they see a lot of weird stuff when they're flying in these very remote areas. When that helicopter pilot picked you up and you saw his expression, did you get the feeling like this guy's seen it before?
100%. When I explained to him, and I didn't even have to go into detail, I just said to him, like, I said those words, I said, bear, 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 so that you'd take it seriously. I said, but I didn't look at a bear, my man. And the way he was looking at me when I said it, and pilots, they sit opposite to a car. They sit like right-hand drive. And so I'll never forget his face, because he's looking at me like, hey, that'll get your hair raised up, right? And he kind of had a bit of a smirk. And I maybe it was on my face, maybe it was the color of my skin. Like, I'm a pretty tan fella. And like, I just said, like, dude, that wasn't a bear, man. Like, there's no way that was a bear. His demeanor, like, completely changed. Very serious tone. You're not crazy. We shouldn't be out here. This isn't the first, and so, like, almost without a doubt, he had seen one and not just heard another story, because of the way that his face reacted. That's a part actually of the story. It sticks in my head. It almost made me feel more scared in that moment, because of the way that this super professional guy looked at me, like the way that he went from kind of like a chuckle and a joke about me getting scared by a bear to when I was like, dude, that wasn't a bear. He just stone face. You're not crazy. We shouldn't be out here. You're not the first person to see them. And like, he got real serious with me. And like I said, the next day, like, there was no more going out alone. There was a lot of things that changed. And so I would accredit that to the pilot, because I only brought this up to a few close friends. Well, I thought were close friends at the time, but it wasn't something that I really paraded around and told the world about, because it definitely wasn't received very kindly. From the minute that I told the first person, that day. So I don't know. But I know what I saw without a doubt. And I know that the pilot, he was absolutely, like, he solidified it for me by just the look on his face and the words that came out of his mouth. He was so professional, but you're not crazy. You're not the first person to see this. We shouldn't be here. Like, just the way it came out, and me being 20 and this guy probably in his mid to late 40s, like, it was so serious. It was a dad moment from this helicopter pilot to me. I kind of looked at him and was like, oh shit, like, whoa, and after that, like, we didn't really talk about it all that much. He brought me back to staging. We reassessed. People kind of poked about this bear, and I said, it is what it is. I got to take it seriously. I was out there alone. I kind of, and then everybody's like, oh, whatever. Now we got to go out and take care of this. And long story short, when that area that I was in, nobody went out in that area for the rest of the day. And when they did go back to troubleshoot that area, they didn't send me. They sent another gentleman, and I asked him what the hike was like down to the scree field, and they said they didn't drop him off at the top of the scree field. They dropped him off way down the line, and he had to walk in from another direction.
That's kind of shady. It's almost like the company knew what was going on.
There is it, and that's something, like, it's crossed my mind on numerous occasions, because there was even areas that we had gone into where and it wasn't like a mandatory thing, and this was about a year later, but we were working in southern BC down by the border, and they, in the safety meetings, had piles of masks from the dollar store, like, on the table, and they said, this is mountain lion country, this is predator country, there's a lot of dangers around here, and guys, there were a lot of guys, especially the ones in small groups, and they'd wear the masks on the back of their head. So it's like you had a face on the back of your head, and the whole idea was it so that things wouldn't sneak up on you from behind, because it looks like you're looking at them from, like, even when you're walking forward, there's still a face facing backwards, if that makes sense,
Yeah, it's smart. I don't know how much that would work. but I would assume it would work a little bit. I'd be like, keep your mask. I'll just bring my firearm. Company doesn't have to buy me one. I'll just bring my own. And I know they sent another crew out to do that job, but did you ever go back to that area?
That area, I mean, ish, yes. But like we had to finish the job there, and we actually didn't finish before winter set in. So we were there for another 4 or 5 weeks, and I was in the general vicinity, but not specifically that area. Like I never did see that scree field again. But I was easily within 4 or 5 kilometers or a couple miles from that area almost on a daily basis. Like this job that we were on it was big, but it wasn't that big. So, I mean, you were kind of bouncing around in probably, I don't know, a 6-mile radius kind of thing.
The other thing I was kind of curious about was when we talk about the creatures, you're seeing big ones, you're seeing small ones. It sounds like a family group, like I said before, and not so much going off their size, but when you were looking at the face of these different things, and did you get the feeling like they're all related?
No, like that wasn't, not even for a second. Nothing to do with the face. The thing that would make me think that these things were related was that they were traveling clearly in a group, and they were clearly foraging in a group. There was absolutely a group mentality. That the vibe coming off of them absolutely was that these are not nomadic, that this was a group of these things, and there was different aged ones. And that's kind of absolutely made me think family, but nothing to do with the face at all. It was more to do with their demeanor and what they were doing at the time and kind of sharing the experience together. That's what made me think that this was like a family group or something along those lines.
One thing that I've theorized over the years, or I've often wondered about, was that feeling of being watched that we as humans have. And when they all got up and started scanning and looking around, I almost wonder if they had realized they were being watched. I mean, it was something we do. We get up and we start looking around, trying to figure out who's looking at us. And I wonder if that's what it was, as opposed to catching your scent. I know you went back to work the next day, but how did this kind of affect you? I mean, was there ever a moment where you thought, I'm not going back out there again?
Yes and no. That feeling existed, but at the time, the experience that I had, I didn't feel terror or threat. And like I said to you a few minutes ago, what I felt like if they had have spotted me, the reaction, and this, I could be completely wrong, but what I had felt was they would have just headed in another direction. That's how it felt. There was no, like, yeah, I understand there was small ones. Like I was looking right at them. I didn't get a really good look at the small ones. They were like, I don't want to say the furthest, but they were definitely further and a lot smaller, so harder to see the features on them. But I understand maybe in like that scenario, whether it's like a mother bear and her cubs, like then they get quite violent. Maybe that could have been a scenario, but from my position and my experience and my perspective, all I felt from my personal experience, it had nothing to do with danger or threat. And it very well could have gone that way, but it didn't. It just, what I saw, my eyes are just staring at something that I always thought was something of lore or myth. And I'm realizing in that exact moment that it's not, but I also didn't, there was no immediate, like, I got to get out of here, or I got to run away from this, or I got to, I made a conscious decision to stand there and stare at them for quite a while in that scenario. It felt like forever, but it was, going back into the woods, my head was on a swivel for some time. But then the memory, it never went away. But at the same time, now I'd say I'm just a little more like, I pay attention a little bit more when I'm in the bush. Like I got a lot of bush around here, and I'm out quite a bit. Cut a lot of wood, do a lot of fish and stuff like that. But I'm more in tune with what's going on around me. I feel like 20-year-old me wandering through the bush wasn't the same as I am now. Almost 20 years later. I'm not the same person, but I'm a lot more attuned to what's going on around me and things. Not that it scares me, but I'll hear a squirrel and it takes all of my attention until I have sourced out whatever it is. And then I'll hear something else and it takes all of my attention. Like I'm very just a little more attentive when I'm in the woods now, but I still go in all the time. Like I said, my experience, it really didn't scare me all that much. It was more of just, it was an experience that I don't think I'll ever have happen again. That was kind of what I was taking in that moment, was like, don't look away because this will never happen again.
You know, John, you're kind of in a unique position. You have the high ground. Not only do you see one, but you see a family group and you have a chance to kind of observe them. I ask everyone on the show, what do you think Sasquatch is? I'm curious on your take.
Well, it's its own entity for sure. It's a living, breathing creature. Like that thing is absolutely, there's no lore or myth or like, I don't think it's stepping between dimensions. I don't like what I looked at was flesh and blood, and the everything about this, the scene that I was looking at just told me that this is something that's kind of, I feel that it's smart enough to know that we can and are a threat to anything that we deem dangerous. So, you know, they're smart enough that they can choose not to be seen. And I think, you know, it's no different than you or me being in our own home. Like, I know my home the best. And if anybody else steps into it, I still know my home the best. And I know, you know, what to do and where to go and how to handle things where their home is nature. And so I think long before people generally see them, like these things are long gone. This thing was thinking, man. Like it definitely had, like there was like cognitive thought there. I could absolutely, just from the gestures of this slender one closest to me watching it, I was like, no, this isn't just a bumbling animal. Like this clearly was, you know, everything was calculated and it was thinking and it was moving things. And you know, like, I mean, I could almost guarantee you that it would have never rolled a rock onto its own foot. Like it would, the spatial awareness was there. It knew its surroundings. It knew what it was doing. It was in its environment. So, at the end of the day, I honestly think that it's just, one of the ones that either slipped through the cracks, or it's one that just chooses not to be seen. I don't know. The Indians got tons of names for them, or Native people, sorry. There's tons of names for these things, and they've been in history for thousands of years. But it's the one mysterious, you know, mythological creature, even though every single other thing that they talked about was real and we have documentation of them. Like, it's hard for me to believe that they, you know, all through history, these things have been talked about, and it's the one mythological creature that, you know, only comes around, or, you know, I don't believe that. I just think it's smarter than we are when it comes to living in its own home. It's in its house. It knows you're coming long before you're coming. And if anybody does manage to see one, it's just stroke of luck, man. I really do. You either do exactly what I did and accidentally sneak up on it, or it wants you to see it, or, you know, I do absolutely what I looked at. There was no myth. There was no lore. That was a living, breathing, thinking, conscious being right in front of me, like without a doubt. There's not a doubt in my mind that thing, looking at it and then looking at larger ones and smaller ones and the whole scenario were going on like right in front of me. There just wasn't a doubt in my mind. It really opened my eyes to what we know and don't know, or what is kept from us, because like it was new to me. But at the end of the day, yeah, it was a flesh and blood creature. It was absolutely just doing what it does, you know?
And I want to thank John